Welcome to the Holiness Today podcast. On this episode, I have a conversation with Dr. Joseph Wood, the principal of Nazarene Theological College in Brisbane, Australia. While he spends his downtime hiking and sharing his campus with local wallabies, his primary work is at the intersection of church history and theology. Joe is an ordained deacon and has contributed extensively to the history and function of the diaconate for our denomination. We discuss his academic journey from East Tennessee to Manchester, his specific research on John Wesley's ecclesiology, and the unique role of the deacon in the life of the church. Dr. Joseph Wood, welcome to the Holiness Today podcast. You are in Brisbane in your office. It's your morning, my evening, and you are at Nazarene Theological College that serves Australia and New Zealand.
Yeah, that's correct.
Welcome.
Thank you, Nate, for having me. I really appreciate the invite.
Yeah. I'm loving the connections we're making. So I connect now. Biographically, you're from America. You went to Trevecca. You're in Australia, but you were educated up in Manchester, and I got connected to you from Michelle in Eurasia, Michelle Linham. So it's just I probably could have met you, at some point when you were in the States, but it's just funny how the Nazarene world works. It's such a network. So glad that I connected with you at this point, unless we've met in the past and I just totally forgot it. If so, I apologize now for being a rude human being, but
not that I can remember, but I wouldn't be surprised if we rubbed shoulders somewhere.
At some point.
In the past.
At some point.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it's good to make these connections and funny how it happens sometimes. So how are you told me that so it's your Friday, my Thursday, but you're on research Fridays. So it's casual Fridays for you. You're in the office. Maybe that'll be an easy segue into it. But what are you working on? What are you researching now? I wish context for our listeners. I was sick all last week. I thought I was doing the interview last week. I would have spent some time reading some of your articles. I feel terrible. I did look up some of them, but I am not well read in Dr. Joseph Wood, and I feel bad about that. I usually try and be polite and at least read something. So did some research.
I don't think there's many people very well read in Dr. Joseph Wood.
Well, I try and at least be polite with some of the guests, get something read under my belt. But I did do some research a little bit. But yeah, what are you working on these days?
Right now, so my area of focus is theology and church history. And I can talk about my journey into the academy after I give you a little snapshot of what I'm doing. So right now, today, after we finish this interview, I'm going to be finishing up an article I'll be submitting to the Wesleyan Theological Journal. It started as a paper that I delivered last year at Nazarene Theological College in Manchester. And it focuses on a Nazarene understanding of ordination, particularly looking at the roles of deacon and elder. This is the fourth thing that I've written on the diaconate or on ordination in the Church of the Nazarene, and it's as we continue our conversation, it'll probably come out why that's been my focus.
Well, you're ordained as a deacon. Did I see that right?
I am ordained as a deacon. That's right. So I have a vested interest in this.
Yeah, and you're kind of a rare bird. That's not usually the usual route. So I will like to ask about that.
I am. The latest figures, we have nearly 30,000 ordained elders, and we have just under 1,000 ordained deacons in the Nazarene world. And I have some thoughts on why that might be the case, and I have some thoughts on why that or how that could be different going forward. So we can tease that out. So that's what I'm working on right now, my research project. I was hoping to get the draft done today. We'll see how long this interview takes. But to get that submitted and see what they say. You never know. When you go for publishing, they might say no, they might say yes, they might say you need to change some things.
Let's start biographically and then we'll dig into that. But maybe for starters, did you always want to be in higher education? How did that work out? Did God? I've talked to professors. Said no, God called me to be a professor from an early age, kind of thing, and then others kind of it formed as they were going, kind of thing. But how did it work for you?
Yeah, I'm definitely the latter. If you knew me as a child, you would see the very shy, quiet. The way I often describe it is, I'm the one, holding my mother's leg after church because I didn't want to see anyone or talk to anyone. Terrified to stand up in front of people and speak. I've always been able to sing. Like my family are musical, but when they ask me, would I be willing to stand up and sing in front of a church. I mean, that's like my nightmare. Um, so I'm very different. If you know me today, you would never think that I was that person. I'm quite outgoing. I'm friendly. I enjoy meeting new people. Networking is one of my favorite things to do. Creating partnerships, visiting new places, and things like that. Um, so no, academic life, teaching was not on the cards. If you were to ask that about 10-year-old Joseph.
So you grew up. Tell us where you grew up, because you are
Yep.
from the States. So tell us, did you grow up in the Church of the Nazarene? What's your background with the Church of the Nazarene then?
Okay, a little bio. Yes, I'm American by birth. If I'm speaking to someone from Texas, I tell them I'm Texan by birth. However, I only lived in Texas for the first 2 years of my life. My father is a pastor and has been for just over 50 years. Props to dad. His first assignment after seminary, he went to Kansas City. He was in Houston, Texas. So that's where I was born. Me and I have one older brother who's about 3 years older than me. So born in Texas. My childhood is Alabama. So my mother, her side of the family is from northern Alabama, and my father got a call to minister in Birmingham, Alabama. So I lived there for my childhood until I was about 11 years old. And then at 11, we moved to East Tennessee, which is where my father's family is from. And that's where they still are. That was my, I don't know, really formative years. If people ask me, where did you come from? I often will say Tennessee. That's kind of my home in terms of my U.S. home. My parents still live there. Then, yeah, so I've always been in the Church of the Nazarene. I've always known the love of Jesus. If you're looking for someone with a testimony about some massive crisis of faith and come to Jesus moment, altar call, that wasn't me. Um, I've just always known the love of Jesus. That's kind of how I describe my spiritual journey. And there have been moments throughout my life where I would say, yeah, this is who I am. And yeah, God, I do want uh, to do this. I do want to follow you, that kind of thing.
And we'll be right back.
I believe that God is still calling people, and people are still saying yes. He's calling young people, women and men. He's calling people who are a little bit older. He's calling families. He's calling his whole church, and he's calling us to missions. If you're a young person and you sense that God is calling you, maybe tugging your heart with a sense of calling your life, don't ignore it. Pray about it, talk to your pastor about it, and then come and speak to us in Global Missions. Go to the website, nazarene.org/the cause. And there you will see some things that will give you excitement and opportunity to be part of the cause of the King and the cause of the kingdom. I hope you do.
Now, back to the rest of the episode. Growing up as a pastor's kid in the Nazarene faith, not having a major crisis moment, did that kind of pull you or push you or lead you towards kind of looking at more of the sacramental aspects of church, of ecclesiology? Because I know it did for me, and I know it has for of other
Yeah.
pastors' kids that have grown up in the church. Did that kind of be where the experience led you to at all?
Yeah, I mean, that is an interesting connection there. I appreciate you making that connection. Um, growing up in the Nazarene world, in my particular branch of the Nazarene world, evangelicalism, broadly understood, hasn't had much of an affinity for the sacramental life as a common form of expressing spirituality and actually holiness. Becoming more and more like Christ. It wasn't until I started doing academic studies that I really began to understand the role that the sacramental life plays in Christian life, not just for us today, but of course throughout Christian history, and of course not within our little Nazarendom, as I often say, but more broadly. So yeah, it was my experience in uh, undergraduate studies being exposed to church history which then opened my eyes to a much bigger church than I thought. In terms of my own, like kind of personal experience, I will say this, that growing up, I grew up in an age, I'm 43, if anybody's interested. Um, I was a child in the 1980s, growing up in Alabama,
Hmm.
and we had Sunday night services. And in those Sunday night services, they typically became testimony services. So someone would say, "I'd like to share something about my week," and then it would just morph into everybody ends up sharing something. If any of you listening have grown up in the Nazarene world, or even just kind of broadly evangelical world, um, you may have experienced this hearing of testimonies, and if you didn't have that same kind of a testimony, you might feel second class, or you might feel, "Am I really saved?" Yeah, these are some questions that I would ask myself as a young child. And so thankfully, I have grown and matured in my faith and my wisdom of the wider Christian world, my reading of the Bible, and my understanding of Jesus. I know that all of those testimonies, however we've come into contact with Christ and however we've given our life to Him, are actually valuable and valid. All of our testimonies matter. Um, so whilst as a child I may have had these moments of questioning, um, my faith, it wasn't ever questioning God. It was actually just questioning my experience. And so I do encourage, I've got children of my own now, and they've grown up in the church. And they might, as an adult, say, "I've never not known the love of Jesus," because I'm a pastor. My wife is a pastor as well. And it would be interesting to see, how they come to their, expression of faith. They've had some moments already, but there will come a day where, are you all in? That kind of a question. So that'd be interesting to see.
So the crucial question for you is not so much when did you first believe, but for you and those you interact with is do you believe? It's more
Yep.
of a present sense. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
And maybe this comes from my reading of John Wesley. That was his question constantly. It's wonderful that you had this experience. Maybe you wish you had some kind of experience, but actually, what's your relationship with Christ like now? And is your relationship with Christ now different than it was before? Um, we talk about growing in grace, and if we were to have a big long conversation about sacraments, I would be using the phrase "means of grace" constantly. That they are ordinary ways that God fills our lives with His Spirit, and there are extraordinary ways as well. That's my kind of Wesley theology coming out there.
So I interrupted you, but so growing up in East Tennessee, Trevecca was an automatic. That's where you were going to go, or was there any challenge there? Did you look at Knoxville or anything like that, or any battles?
No, I'm a child of the Nazarenedom, and
Yeah.
so Trevecca was the option. It's the only place I applied to. It's where my parents went, where they met, got married, where my brother he was 3 years ahead of me in school, so he had begun already. So going there was kind of comfortable. I began to become a bit more open and what's the word I'm looking for? Social by the end of high school, willing to experience new things. However, Treco became like a half step towards that. It was a bit of a safe option, you might say. However, loved it. Absolutely loved it. Tribeca was a wonderful experience for me. Um, I'll tell you about my kind of genesis towards academic life. Um, in high school, I was a science and math kind of guy. I liked logic. I liked having an answer, objectivity. So one of my favorite things about math, until you get to like high level calculus, there's an answer, right? There's always an answer, and you can check your work, and you know it's right. I did not like reading. I did not like English literature classes. I did not like poetry. And what do you think they mean by this, or what do you think the author's trying to say? And I'm like, but that's what the words say on the page. It's just kind of black and white, isn't it? But there's always something else going on. Did not like that at all. So I thought towards the end of my high school career that I would become like a math teacher. And by that time, I'd seen a little bit of indication, gifts, people telling me, "Oh, I think you could become a teacher one day," and maths is what I like. So I thought, okay, let's go for that. But for whatever reason, and I've shared this story with many people before, I don't know what it was. When it came to registering for a major, I chose religious studies. And maybe it was because I was doing a little bit of work with our youth group. Um, maybe it was because I had been asked to do some lessons in Sunday school. I don't know what it was, but I said religious studies. So in what was it? The fall semester of 2001, I began my Trevecca career. My first class was with Tim Green. God bless you, Tim Green. It was like an introduction to the Bible class. And the way I describe a Tim Green class is it's story time with Uncle Tim. I never had to take a notes in a Tim Green class because he was such a good communicator. I remembered what he said. So I loved it first semester. Second semester, I took a class, and I won't tell you who the teacher was. Um, uh, it was a Bible class, and I did not like it at all. Maybe because it was 7:30 a.m. And it was heavy stuff. But in that particular class, it kind of narrowed my vision of what religious studies or theological studies was to its Bible, its language, its word studies, its this kind of deep technical kind of thing. Did not interest me at all. At the same time, because it's liberal arts, I was taking some history classes, and I just fell in love with it. It was just general world civilization, maybe European history. I can't remember what it was, but I absolutely loved it. I'm like, this is where my heart is. So by the end of the second semester, at the end of the first full year, I switched majors and moved to history and political science. I thought maybe I'll become a lawyer because I got that logic, rational thinking, but they didn't have enough classes to do like a pre-law degree. And that was life-changing for me. I had some fantastic professors in that subject area. I learned not only about history, but I learned about church history through the political science side of things. It was not Democrats, Republicans, that kind of stuff. It was political philosophy. How do people think people should organize themselves and operate in a polis? And it was such a good experience because it kind of taught me how to ask questions, how to ask good questions. So by the end of that degree, I learned, thankfully, that theological studies is not just that technical Bible stuff. It is Bible, it is church history, it is theology, it's pastoral ministry. It's so much bigger than that. And so I fell in love with church history. I went straight from the undergraduate degree in history and political science to a master's degree at Trevecca. And my focus became kind of church history. And it was during that program that I was introduced to Wesley studies and early Methodist studies. And that kind of took me to the next steps.
No, that's good. I was also a history. I was too lazy to be history poli-sci. I should have been history poli-sci, but I did the thing where I just took a bunch of classes from a bunch of different departments and never got a minor in order. So I was just, I think, history with a bunch of half-baked minors. So, but took some theology classes. But yeah, history. It just helps you get the context. I mean, that's what I loved about it, is just understanding that. So, but I did do my undergraduate research project on John Wesley, looking at Randy Maddox and Kenneth Collins' different view.
Yeah.
And,
No, that's
so
great.
I still tied it back to Wesley, but no, it.
I'll tell you, my undergraduate history project was Trevecca's response to the Vietnam War.
Ah, that's interesting.
That was an interesting project.
Yeah.
And what kind of sparked it for me was, if you've done any kind of 20th century studies,
Yeah.
you'll come across, the Vietnam War, and there's all kinds of different, debates. Should we be involved? Should we have not been involved? How well were military received when they returned? A lot of social change taking place, a lot of demonstrations and things like that. So I was like, okay, all of these people that I read about in the quote unquote secular world, who were in college age, were pretty much not happy with this. Trevecca has people that age. Were they not happy with this? And so I started to do some digging, and I went to the archives, and I thought, okay, where could I even find out anything about this? And there was a student newspaper called Trevecco's. And I went through the archive of 66, 7, 8, up to like 72. And for the first few years of the Vietnam War, nothing was said at all in student newspapers. And then for the last couple of years, there were quite a few articles being written. And if you look at they still did a yearbook back then. If you look at the yearbooks, even the design of the yearbook shifted, I think in 1972, to a much more colorful. It was remarkable. Like you could see it on the shelf. There's something different about that. What I found out was they had a new editor, and the editor was more inclined to write about things going on in the wider world. The next step was, because there's not a lot of documentary evidence, I started interviewing people. I met some people who were studying at that time and found out that there was a lot of heated debate taking place in classes about this issue. There was one story that someone shared with me about a female student at Trevecca who was going to go out on a date with a non-Trevecca student. That non-Trevecca student happened to be Vietnamese. And the police were phoned when they found out that the Vietnamese student, non-Trevecca person, was coming to take this Trevecca young woman on a date. And I'm like, whoa, what is going on here? So it kind of revealed to me that even though we might not see it in the documents, and even though we might not hear it in the official story, there's a lot of things going on. That it takes a bit of work. And this is why I love history, why I love research.
Oh yeah.
There's so many different avenues, and that was kind of this little spark, you might say, for the next steps in my life.
Yeah. Did you graduate? I'm trying to think now. Let me do a quick math. It's going to be bad. Did you graduate from Trevecca in 2001, 2002?
I started in 2001.
Okay.
Finished in 6 with the BA and the MA. I just went straight into the masters.
Yeah, I mean that's a crazy time that I'm sure students may be studying now. But the war in Iraq, I mean that plays into the zeitgeist of all that and everything too. It's kind of crazy.
My first semester, 2-3 weeks in, was 9/11.
Wow.
So I do remember. We had chapel. Chapel was on that day, and the whole student body, whoever was there and willing, went to chapel. And we just had this, almost like a silent prayer meeting. I mean, we didn't, you experienced it. We didn't know what to think about this thing. But yeah, that was my first couple of weeks of undergraduate. That took place. Yeah.
That's wild. Mm-hmm. I had to do a research project in my master's original, not the final project. It was just for a class. And so I was working in the Nazarene archives at the time. So I dug into the history of the Church of the Nazarene in Japan during World War II, man. It's interesting. It's interesting stuff. I mean, there was some really cool stories. I mean, I'm not going to do it justice. I'm not going to be able to pull it off. But the one that stands out to me that right after Nanking, right after Japan went into Nanking, Japanese pastors, got across the front lines and prayed with Chinese pastors, Nazarene.
That's incredible.
And it's just crazy to hear those stories. I mean, the letters were right in the archives. It was really cool to see that. But it was one of those things where I was just reading these letters and I'm like, this is so cool. But pretty interesting. All the global church that we're in, really Absolutely. Where it touches and all that stuff. So interesting stuff.
Yeah, stories have such an impact. And I mentioned Tim Green as a good storyteller. As I've moved on into the world of lecturing and teaching, I try to model myself off of that. I try to tell good stories because they're memorable and they're real. These are real people. And when I do church history, one of the things I have to convince my students to kind of get into their psyche is people haven't really changed, right? People are people. It doesn't matter where you live or what time period you live in. You want to be loved. You want to be valued. You want to be productive. You want to be at peace. We all have these same kind of desires. I mean, I've got an answer for that. We're kind of created in the image of God. But C.S. Lewis has a phrase that I often use in class. It's called chronological snobbery. You ever come across that phrase?
I don't know, but tell me what it is. Tell me.
he uses that phrase to describe a way of viewing history that says we are better than those who came before
Oh
us,
yeah, yeah. I've heard him talk.
right?
Yeah, I've heard that. Yep.
So the phrase he uses is it's a form of chronological snobbery to think that you are better or have more worth or more value than those who have gone before you. And he had this recommendation in that same piece of writing where he says, anytime I read a new book, I read 3 old books right afterwards, just to ensure that I'm giving justice to the many, many, many millions of people who've gone before.
There's also the reverse of that I fall into, where you idolize the past, as if everything was so good in the past and we're just struggling now, you know. So,
That's a
uh,
fair statement. That is a
you know
fair
what I'm saying?
statement.
So you can do both sides of that. So I try and hold tension, but yeah, that's good though. The chronological snobbery, that's good. So I keep interjecting, but so you finished up at with your undergrad. You stayed and did a master's. It looked like. Did I see that right? You did a master's at
I
Trevecca,
did. I did a master's at
and that's where you
Trevecca.
got into Wesley studies. Is what you were
Yeah. So
saying?
at that time, the master's degree was a hybrid model, but we weren't yet into the video conferencing
Yeah.
online kind of a world. And so the way that worked is you would have 2-week intensives where you would come to the campus and have in-person intense teaching for a few days at the beginning of the term and a few days at the end of the term. And in between, you know, you're working on coursework, reading, research, whatever it was. The other thing about that award is it was very general. So there wasn't like majors, there wasn't a focus. You could do a research element if you wanted to, but you didn't have to. And so I simply just took 11 units, 11 classes. I've taken a youth ministry master's level class. I've taken some mission class. I've taken at that time the kind of hot topic, so to speak, in theological world was radical orthodoxy. So I took in class in that with Henry Spalding. But the one that I remember the most was a class on Wesley studies. I think it was just a class on the, you know, like personal work of John Wesley or whatever it was. And that class kind of introduced me to something that, I mean, today I would probably call it prevenient grace. You know, God has been at work in my life beforehand and kind of shaping me in this Wesleyan tradition, but I didn't really have the language for it, didn't really have the words for it, didn't have a framework for it until I took that class. And once I began to be introduced to the writings of Wesley, and then later on, you know, Wesleyan scholars since, I just, you know, it's almost like I found my identity, right?
Yeah.
My my way of viewing the world and my way of reading the Bible is Wesleyan. And the final paper for that class, I got a really nice comment from the teacher that said something like, if only you did this or this or this, you could consider publishing this. And I was like, wow, that's quite an accolade. I had never received anything like that. And that gave me a bit of a confidence to say, okay, I have been kind of sensing this call of God, not 100% sure what that is going to look like. I know I enjoy study, and I've been told by some people in my life, you know, maybe you should consider teaching. So I would say that's kind of like either a fulcrum, a Rubicon, whatever word you want to use, a significant moment in my life, a transition period where I began to gain clarity on what the next steps would be, both in my kind of professional life, career, but primarily in my calling that I'd been sensing for at least 2 or 3 years leading up
Mhm.
to that point.
And then shortly after that, you did. When did you go to Manchester? How did God work that out in your heart? How did that work out?
Yeah. So I'll kind of draw together that professional and that calling thing because that truly is what kind of pointed me in this direction. I had been sensing a call of God for a few years during my undergraduate, and when I say that, anyone who says they've been called of God to some form of ministry, all of us have a calling. By the way, you don't have to be a professor, teacher, pastor. Everybody has a call of God. Everybody has gifts given by God, and everyone is called to use those gifts for others and for God's purposes. So, just wanted to caveat that. In my experience, it was I had been around the church forever. It's all I really knew in terms of spirituality and whatnot. The Nazarene world, I knew that I heard this phrase, call of God, and it was either attached to someone who's a pastor or someone who was a missionary. That was kind of the two characters who would use that language. And the way that they would describe it, it was something like, God spoke to me. They might have some dramatic kind of Paul on the road to Damascus story, or they might have there were little things taking place in my life that I wasn't sure what they were, but eventually I realized, oh, this was God, more of a Peter kind of experience, right? I would put myself in that second category. Um, when I started to truly sense, okay, God's leading me in some direction, and you're in that age where you're thinking, okay, what's my future? I went to the manual of all places, because in the manual we have descriptions of ministry. We have a description of these roles that I had seen and heard about, but I'd never actually done any kind of research or only anecdotally from stories that I'd heard. So I went to read the manual, and when I did, I read about ministry, I read about ordination, and then I read about elder, and I read about deacon. And it was when I was reading the elder section that I thought, okay, that's not me. That's local church pastor. That's shepherd. That's someone who is looking after a group of people. They're leading this flock, that kind of a thing. That's not me. I don't see myself as a pastor. When I read the deacon description, it was as if God said, "Here you go, buddy. That's you." And when I read it, it was quite broad. If you've ever looked at that, many people haven't, but if you do have a look at it, it does talk about God calling people into a lifetime of ministry that isn't an elder. That isn't this local pastor, that isn't this, preacher every Sunday kind of a thing. And as I read that, it was as if God was saying to me, here's your door. If you want to open that, I'm going to walk with you, that kind of a thing. So I began to open that door. At the same time, I was having this kind of interest in academic life and study and research, teaching possibly. And I began to ask some mentors in my life, to pray for me. One of those mentors was a dear man called Richard Reed, who just passed away recently. And he was a wise, older, Nazarene pastor in East Tennessee who we had this conversation. I shared with him what I just shared with you. And he said, well, it sounds like you need to do some further studies. And I had been considering that. But he said, did you know we have a Nazarene college in Manchester, England? No, never heard about that. He said, I think they have a connection with the University of Manchester, which means they can offer, higher degrees. I think they even do a PhD. I was like, okay. And it turns out this, small town pastor from East Tennessee had befriended a former principal of that college who had come over back in the 1980s to do some kind of a preaching tour. They became friends. And ever since then, this is like 20-year relationship. This pastor had gone to the UK and visited that principal. They had kept in communication with one another by like handwritten letters. And so when this young man comes to him and says, I think God might be calling me into higher level study, that was the first thing that came to his mind. So I met with Kent Brower, who was a teacher in New Testament at the college. He was teaching like an intensive class in Kansas City in January of 2006. And after about an hour and a half conversation, I was convinced I want to go to Manchester. I'll do a 1-year master's degree and kind of up my game, so to speak, because I hadn't had a research element in my Tribeca experience. And he said, once you do that, you'll have the study abroad experience. You'll see what it's like, and then maybe you can apply and maybe pursue PhD. So in September 2006, I moved to Manchester, England, and that became home for me for actually about the next 15 years.
Yeah.
With a couple of breaks in between.
Yeah. Was there culture shock right away? I mean, how was that moving from Tennessee to Manchester? What was that like?
Okay, so backtrack a little bit. 2 years prior to this, so in the summer of 2004, I did a study abroad experience in the UK. Any of you people in higher education in North America know about the the CCCU, the Council for Christian Colleges and Universities, and they have something called Best Semester. Best Semester is a way that the CCCU provides study abroad experiences for lots of these smaller private institutions that don't have the connections. And that study abroad experience was at Oxford University. And I thought that was my study abroad experience, right? 3 weeks, summertime. I did a couple of classes that were able to transfer back to my Tribeca studies. And I was like, okay, that's it. So then fast forward 2 years later, I'm now moving there. I didn't know anyone. I had never been to Manchester. I'd been to the UK, so I had a little glimpse of what it was like. But yeah, moved there in September, started studying, and did the master's degree, graduated in the following October, then moved home for about 8 months, saved some money, and applied for PhD. Moved back in May of 2008 and started doing the PhD. So yeah, whirlwind. And it was during that experience of this mentor in my life. By the way, everyone needs a mentor or two or three, who's you could be open and honest with, who knows you well and who's happy to ask those difficult questions. So the mentor in my life, this kind of call of God, this reading of a deacon, this opportunity to go to the UK, and that really solidified, okay, I think God's calling me into ministry as a deacon with a specific remit of education.
And so did you, in doing your master's, it was a research track. So did you just have to just start writing right away? Was that like you jumped in?
Yeah.
Did you pick the study at the outset? Is that how that worked for you?
So the British master's degree is okay. There's a difference in North American and Commonwealth system. So in the North American system, liberal arts is kind of the queen, right? And in the liberal arts system, you're trying, the kind of philosophy behind this is you're trying to create a well-rounded citizen, right? And so about 35 or 40% of your studies is still kind of general education. And then you choose a major for about 65% of your study. And then that kind of propels you into the next steps. So you're getting kind of a broad view of things. In the British education system, you are getting a narrow, deep understanding of a particular subject area by the time you get to university. So in your primary education and then moving up into high school, by the time you get to high school, you're choosing like 6 subjects to focus on. And then the last 2 years of an American equivalent of high school, you're doing 4 subjects in the UK. And one of those subjects is probably where you're going to go for university if you go to university. So you're narrowing already in high school, and then by the final 2 years, you've kind of narrowed it down. So when you do your undergraduate degree in the UK, it's just that subject area, right? You're not doing liberal arts. You're not studying all these different things. From day one, you're doing math. You're doing science. You're doing whatever your chosen subject is. So when you get to a master's level in the British system, it's much more narrow, and it's you have a reduced amount of classes. So my master's degree in the UK was only 4 classes. What I ended up, because I knew I was interested in Wesley studies, I kind of was able to shape those 4 classes into that image, so to speak. So I did a couple of classes on holiness, but then my research paper, like my big paper for those classes, focused on like a Wesleyan understanding of holiness from a theological perspective, holiness from a historical perspective. I did something called a literature review, which was pure research, and that was working on some John Wesley studies, which then led to everyone does a dissertation in master's degree in the UK, which was at the time 15 to 18,000 word. And so my master's research project was on John Wesley's theology of the Lord's Supper. So yeah, just 4 units in a year's time. Each unit, again, at the time, it's much less now, but at the time it was 10,000 words per unit. That was broken into some different assignments, but basically 10,000 words times 4, 40,000 words plus a 15 to 18,000 word dissertation. So you're doing nearly 60,000 words in total. This was back in 2007. My colleagues over in Manchester, they've managed to reduce that down, so it's not as scary as it used to be.
And then just jumped right into PhD work. Did you continue that project on Lord's Supper? It looked like you did something on prevenient grace. Did I see that right, or what was your research project?
I published on prevenient grace. So I shifted from Lord's Supper, which was kind of a more manageable with a smaller project, to a broader area, ecclesiology. So my PhD was John Wesley's ecclesiology. And for those who don't know, ecclesiology is simply the big word for the study of the church, the nature and the function of the church. And I found that topic very fascinating. It was suggested to me by the person who became my supervisor. He said this is an area that has been investigated before, but it's time to do it again. It needs to be investigated again. There was a book that had come out around the same time that I started, that took a very different view to where I was going to go. And so that kind of gave me this gap in the market, so to speak. So when you do a PhD, you need to find, you need to make a new contribution to knowledge, right? You need to have something new, and that's why by the time you get to PhD, you're doing something very narrow. And for some students, so since then I've become a supervisor myself, and you have to help these students understand that regardless of what you think the PhD is, the academy sees it as the beginning point, right? So I've had some students who are, in the later stages of life, do a PhD, and for them it's kind of like a culmination, right? Like I've wanted to do this for so long, and that's wonderful, great for them. However, you're writing for the academy, and the academy says, well, the PhD is the first step into the academy. So whatever you're doing, you need to see as something new, something fresh, and something that might be very narrow that maybe nobody will read.
Yeah. So what did you look at with Wesley's ecclesiology? What was your argument? What were you seeking to show?
So when it comes to Wesley's understanding of the church, you're always wrestling with his context of being a Church of England priest in the 18th century, and the outcome, Methodism became a church, right? So throughout his life, he would say over and over and over again to criticism, I am a Church of England man. I'll live and die in the Church of England. If Methodism leaves the Church of England, God will leave them. I mean, that's one of his quotes. And he's in this constant tension of working within this Anglican kind of framework, and in his authority to preach, to administer the sacraments, came through his church. His theology he inherited really came primarily through that filter of the Anglican tradition. But at the same time, he and Charles and the other early Methodists have developed this system that's almost like a parallel movement, which was designed to basically encourage people to live holy lives, right? I often describe, for people who are not in the tradition or who don't know much about it, I would say things like small groups, right? So early Methodism, think small groups, and they had some large small groups, which would be the societies. They had some smaller small groups, which would be the classes of about 12 people. And then you got a smaller group called the bands. And in each one of those levels, it was an organized way of encouraging others to become more like Jesus. I mean, that's the simple way of describing it. However, because the Methodist societies, classes, and bands include singing, right? Hymn singing, Charles Wesley's hymns. They include preaching. They include, on occasion, sacraments if John or Charles Wesley or some other ordained person was there. Those sound and look a lot like church. So he's constantly battling, he and Charles both, battling criticism from the outside saying, you're starting a church, aren't you? So my investigation was into some of those irregularities, and that's the word that I use. The preaching stuff, the preaching outdoors, the meeting in small groups, the building buildings. They started building buildings by the middle of the 18th century. Um, he rewrote, revised the Book of Common Prayer, which is an Anglican prayer book in the Church of England. He revised that for the North American Methodists, which ended up becoming their prayer book. And then the main thing that he did set some people apart, send them to North America to lead the Methodists in America after the American Revolutionary War had taken place. So I looked at those irregularities because that's the main things that he was criticized for. These things look like church. And my conclusion was that Methodism, as it was in the 18th century, never ticked all of the identifying marks of what it means to be a church. And those identifying marks are outlined in the Church of England equivalent to our Articles of Faith, right? So that they call them the 39 Articles of Religion, and one of those is on the church, and that became the outline for my thesis. It says the church is the congregation of faithful people where the pure word of God is preached and the sacraments are duly administered. That's it. That's what church is. So that became the framework. So I addressed each of those controversial issues and raised some significant, at least in my mind, questions about later interpretations that said John Wesley was creating a church. He knew what he was doing. It was intentional. And Methodism was by design a church. I disagree with that. Yes, Methodism became a church, but I don't think that was Wesley's intention.
Yeah.
There you go. That's my thoughts.
You would argue that it was a ministry, a discipleship tool. You'd make all that argument, but not an actual definitive. So your argument is that Wesley kind of held to those Reformation standards of definitions of what a church is throughout.
True. Yeah. And because there wasn't that the sacraments are duly administered, that's baptism, Lord's Supper, and ordination. Because Methodism did not have a framework for those three things, at least in the time of Wesley, until you get to this American experience. But one of the major issues that I had to address was he ordained some people for America. I mean, that's a no-no in the Anglican system. Yeah. Only bishops can do that. He rewrote a Book of Common Prayer. I mean, that's a no-no. You can't do that. That's kind of sacred and traditional, in that system. The third thing, and this was all happening in the same year in 1784. The third thing was he registered the properties. So they have properties, right? And he registered these properties under one unifying umbrella or one deed. And so it's like, okay, so you're putting properties together, you're writing a prayer book, and you're ordaining people. That sounds like ministry and sacraments to me. However, the only way that you can really understand that is if you understand the situation in North America at the time. And this is where my broader history background really helped. If you know anything about American history, it was 1776, Declaration of Independence. And it was up to like 1783 or so until that Revolutionary War was ended and the Constitution is established, and we have a new country. Well, 95% of the Church of England priests, which is what they were in North America, or in America, they left because they swore allegiance to the monarch. And so by definition, they were traitors once the revolution began. So I don't blame them, 95%. If they are swearing allegiance to the king at the time, King George III, they're going to get out of there because they've got like a target on their back. Some stayed. Some aligned themselves with the colonists. Very few of them did. Well, at the same time, John Wesley's Methodists in America are relying upon the Church of England for the sacraments because they don't have ordained ministers in America. So there's a letter exchange between him and the Bishop of London. That's another little historical fact. There was no bishop in America, and that was intentional. It was a power thing. You didn't want a bishop in America because once you have a bishop in America, then they could side with the colonists and they could do their own thing. So you put the Bishop of London in charge of the priests in America. So you have a letter exchange between John Wesley and the Bishop of London saying, hey, we've got so many 100,000. It was like 250,000 Methodists in America who are destitute of the Lord's Supper. And because I'm an Anglican, I'm not going to let someone, anyone, administer the Lord's Supper or baptism. He said, we're having babies being born. They need to be baptized. That's the Anglican way, right? But they can't, because all of these priests have left. So my argument ends up being the American situation is unique. But the kind of twist to this is it wasn't some kind of a pragmatic solution to an issue. He didn't just say, okay, well, I'm going to ordain some people because they need it. He actually justified his actions using Anglican resources, Church of England resources from the previous 2 centuries, the 17th and the 16th centuries. And so I make a stronger connection between Wesley's ecclesiology, his understanding of the church of the 18th century, as being founded upon several key Anglican theologians in the 17th and the 16th centuries. And that hadn't really been done before. So I guess that's kind of my contribution to knowledge.
Well, and excuse my ignorance, but so help my history here. When that happens, how long after the war starts does the American Anglican, I guess you could say, break from the Anglican?
Yep.
And is there a time after that where the American Methodists are interacting within the Episcopal denomination? What's the development of that? I mean, that's a...
This is one of the most fascinating pieces of that research and that story. I'll tell you a couple of things, especially for those who might be interested in doing higher level research. This is my story. For the first year of my studies, my PhD studies on John Wesley, I didn't read John Wesley at all. I only read Anglican theology and a little bit of continental theology, Reformation theology, in the 16th and 17th centuries. I spent a year reading from Henry VIII, if you know anything about Reformation history, up to 1689, which is something called the Act of Toleration, which kind of, changes the ability for people to worship in different ways in the kingdom. So that first year, I'm just reading. The key person is Richard Hooker, if anybody's interested. And I read all of Richard Hooker. I mean, we're talking like 3,000 pages. But as I'm reading this, I just could not help but hear John Wesley, right? This person is writing 100 and a bit years before John Wesley. And I'm like, that's his thinking. This is his theology. This is his practice. What's going on here? Why have I never made this connection before? And I read several people in the 17th century as well. Some people he has mentioned, some people who are just well known within Anglican circles. And it convinced me that one cannot understand John Wesley's theology and practice if one doesn't spend the time understanding what's going on in the Church of England for 200 years prior to him. That was the first thing. Second thing was, and this is where I miss, or I kind of lament when we're, because we're we're in a digital world now. Most students access their stuff online, even books these days, but walking the stacks can be a joy. So I was walking the stacks one day in Manchester, and I came across a book called I don't know, Methodism and Reconciliation. I don't know what it was. And I just picked it off the shelf and just started reading it. The first chapter. I got to page 12 or 13, and I read something that said William White, who was a Anglican priest in America during the Revolutionary period, William White wrote a treatise called The Case of the Protestant Episcopal Church in America Considered. And that treatise, the author said, this is a Methodist book, the author said, it would be unusual if Wesley's keen antenna hadn't picked up on that treatise, because many of his arguments resonated with what William White said, and that was it. And the guy kept going and writing about something else. Like, who is this William White person? What is that treatise? What's this connection between the two? And so I found that treatise. I read it. Oh my goodness. This is the connect point that I hoped existed, but didn't know it did exist. John Wesley and William White are a parallel story. So to answer your question about the Episcopal Church, its founding and things like that, I said earlier that about 95% of the Anglican priests, left America because of the Revolution. Well, about 5% stayed. One of those was a person called William White, and William White was the chaplain for the Continental Congress in Philadelphia. He sided with the colonists, argument for freedom, independence, and so he stayed. In 1782, okay, so the war's pretty much done. We're working on the Constitution, trying to get that completed and ratified. 1782, he writes this treatise. And in this treatise, the question was simply, we have people here who want to continue in this Episcopal Anglican form of ecclesiology, of church, but we don't have a bishop. So what do we do? If you don't have a bishop, you can't ordain people. And he had two proposals. One of those proposals was we can wait until things calm down and maybe relationships will mend between us and the church in England. And so we can, have somebody do it the proper way later on down the road. Or let's just choose one of us who are already ordained as a priest. Let's choose one of us to be a bishop. And it's a blip in the system. It's not normal. It's irregular, right? Let's do that. And then we have a bishop and then we can move forward because we all agree we want to keep this thing going. Now, he put that to the others who remained, and a small group of them, and they ended up going for the option number one. Let's wait until things calm down. But what I found in that treatise was the arguments he was making to have this little irregular, okay, we'll have a bishop. We don't have a bishop. Let's just make somebody a bishop, and so we can move on in the same tradition. Exact same arguments John Wesley made for ordaining somebody for the Methodists. The other key connection point was William White has a letter exchange between him and the Bishop of London, making the exact same requests. Could you send either some ordained people or could you consecrate somebody a bishop? Because we got this diaspora now of people who are desperate for ministry and for sacraments. John Wesley said the exact same thing to the exact same person. And both of them made their arguments based in 17th and 16th century Anglican theologians. That came because I just walked through the stacks and started reading the book.
That's interesting. Yeah. Yeah, you can't walk through the stacks online anymore. At least it doesn't present itself that way,
I'm hoping one day like virtual reality will come through and we can do that.
Walk through the library. Yeah. That's good. So then how long after that did the Methodist... So in my understanding, the Methodists in America at that time were getting... Once the revolution took place, they started working with the Episcopal, what became the Episcopal Church, and then they break away after the revolution. See, I'm foggy on American Methodism.
That's all right.
I'm terrible.
And this is one key thing that I learned moving to the UK. There are different forms of Methodism around the world. They all would trace their lineage back to early Methodism, John and Charles Wesley. But because John Wesley never set up a church, from the beginning, after his death, you have multiple forms of Methodism because he didn't give a nice blueprint, like a nice plan. And it took the Methodists, even in Britain, it took the Methodists at least 6 years before they even came up with an agreed plan. But that agreement was two different ways of doing Methodism. The American Methodist story is a very different story, because one of the people that John Wesley sent over to America was Thomas Coke. And Thomas Coke was an ordained priest in the Church of England. He went over. You had somebody else who was there called Francis Asbury, who was also an ordained priest. And John Wesley sent Coke to appoint Francis Asbury as a superintendent. And that was the word that he used. He didn't want to use the word bishop because that's not what he believed that he was doing, So it was supposed to be Coke and Asbury as co-superintendents for the work, the Methodist work in America. And he was kind of blessing them, go do your thing. You're a separate country now. However, when Coke arrives and they have their first kind of Methodist conference to establish themselves as this new thing, Coke and Asbury ended up calling themselves bishops. And so from day one, the American Methodist system has bishops, which the British system has never had bishops, right? Yes. That's significant because it was never Wesley's intention, desire, and it actually formed a break between Wesley and early Methodism and the American Methodist system. Since then, there's not been a close relationship in polity because Asbury took the American Methodist Church in a very different way.
So does the British Methodist, do they ordain through like a presbytery, or is it
Yep.
is that how they do it? Okay.
Yep.
Interesting.
So they don't have bishops. They have it's a bit more like our system in the Nazarene world, where we don't have like a tiered kind of a system. We're all one ordained thing, and it's kind of like a greater among equals, whatever.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's a Presbyterian system, is what it is. Yeah.
Yeah. Interesting. I didn't know that. That's fascinating. Or if I did, I forgot. So yeah,
it's all right. I mean, it's again, this is a small little niche world. I don't know if your listeners would even be interested in this, but I found it just an absolutely fascinating area of study.
It is interesting. It's fun,
and that's
to
helped
nerd out.
me. Yeah, it's helped me with the rest of my teaching and publishing and things like that since then.
Yeah. And so at what point did you say you had researched in the manual and you said deacon fits with me? Were you working on your ordination through your education? Did that come after, a little bit before? How did that work out?
So if your listeners know how it works, the first step towards ordination is local license. You sense a call of God into some form of ministry. You're not 100% sure what that might be. Maybe you are pretty clear, from day one. Some people, God's calling me to do this. First step in that is to share that with your pastor, share that with your church board, and they will, pray about that. They'll meet with you. They might ask you some questions, and they'll, all being well, they'll give you what's called a local license. So you get at least a year to kind of explore this calling. During that time, when it works well, it means you'll have some mentoring in place. You'll get some opportunities. You might even get an opportunity to preach, do some teaching. You might work alongside a pastor, go visit people, all the different things that pastors do, just to give you kind of a glimpse of what ministry might look like. After that first year, you then are eligible, depending on your board and how the things have gone in your own kind of personal walk with Jesus, and you're eligible to apply for a district license. Once you get a district license, you begin this kind of process towards ordination, which includes education requirements and experience requirements. Things have changed slightly since I started back then. Now, before you can apply for a district license, you do need to start education. So you need to have a quarter of the 24 course of study units. So 6 units done before you can apply for a district license. And that's, again, this further way of giving you a chance to explore your calling, to get some education under your belt, and to show a bit of dedication, on your part. Because if you truly believe God's calling you, then you're going to submit to the system, as harsh as that may sound. It's there for a reason. And I could have plenty of conversations with people about that. Right. So for me, I got my first district local license in East Tennessee, small little church, and that was during my university age. Then by the end of my time in America, I had applied for my first district license. Then I moved to the UK in 2006. I kept my membership in East Tennessee for that time period, but then when I moved back in 2008 and knew I was going to be there for a while, I went ahead and transferred my membership to a local church in Manchester. So that also transferred my license from one district to another. And that started my journey, my journey towards ordination, really proper. Every year we'd have a annual interview. You'd have, a questionnaire that you would fill in. We were assigned mentors. And for me, because I was considering deacon, it also became a time for me to kind of help both myself, for clarity's sake, and my district kind of learn what a deacon was. Because as you probably are aware, very few people even know an ordained deacon in the Nazarene world. And as a church historian, as an academic, I just started doing some research during my licensing process. And so every year I might come up with something new to share with my minister, board of ministry, and they ultimately, were convinced that that this person should be ordained as a deacon, not as an elder. And it took a long time for various reasons, but in 2018, I was ordained as a deacon by Eugene Duarte in Sheffield, United Kingdom. And that was it was a wonderful day of confirmation, right? By that time, I had already published an article on the deacon in the Church of the Nazarene. I'd become like this, I don't know, a resource for people who were exploring that. I ended up having a master's level student who did her research project on the diaconate in the Church of the Nazarene. So I wasn't the only person to write something about this. She did a bit of Nazarene archive study and research as well. So she got even more material than I had, which was wonderful. Shout out to Stan Ingersoll, who was the archivist at the time, who helped a lot. So since then, I've had several people, speak to me about this, and I've been able to share kind of my journey.
So what would be the I don't know, maybe in 1 point, 2 points, 3 points for the layman, for the non-elder, for the non-ordained. What would be a good layman's explanation of the difference between deacon and elder?
Yeah. So I will reveal something about my current research. I think we have not defined the elder appropriately enough, which has then spilled over into why we haven't been able to define the deacon appropriately enough. Our primary definition of elder has become preacher, right? So if you read the manual, one of the first things you're going to read is we, in the Church of the Nazarene, have one order of the preaching ministry. That's kind of the phrase that's being used, and that is an elder. Well, I understand, and I know the theology, I know the history behind that. That's kind of the research I'm working on right now. I don't think that story's told well enough, but the confusing thing for me is anyone can preach in the Church of the Nazarene. Lay people can preach, licensed ministers can preach, deacons can preach, and elders can preach. So knowing that is kind of confusing to say you've got one order of preaching ministry when you allow other people to preach. So I was like, okay, I'm not sure about that. So then with deacon, the way I often describe deacon to the layperson, as you said, is this is someone who senses a call of God into a lifetime of ministry in the church for a specific gifting or calling, right? And for me, that's become education. I knew from, the time of discernment that education, teaching is going to be my call. That's, I believe, how God has kind of gifted me, how I've been formed, how I've been shaped, and I've seen, I've been able to experience that, and I've had confirmation, from people about that. So for me, I believe God's called me to a lifetime of ministry and service to the church through the avenue of education, and that, for me, has been affirmed through ordination. I have other friends who would say the same thing. God's called me to a lifetime of ministry in service to the church through the gift of administration. A friend of mine who is also an ordained deacon wrestled with the same questions. And most of his ministry career, he's always worked for the church, but most of his ministry career has been through administration. Another example, and this goes back to kind of the history of the genesis of deacon, because it's only been an ordained position since 1985, was youth minister, associate minister, music minister. These are all people who never saw themselves as becoming an elder, never saw themselves as becoming, a local church pastor, but definitely had a clear calling to a lifetime of service. This might be controversial, I think missionaries are deacons. I think missionaries in the Nazarene system, you can become a missionary through different avenues, but if you've got someone who says, I think God's calling me to be a missionary, put them on the ordination track towards deacon. Let them get educated. Let them get experience. Let them be authorized. And then when they're out in the mission field, you got an ordained person. Now, granted, a lot of our missionaries are ordained elders, and they do pastoral work. That's absolutely fine. Absolutely fine. I guess what I'm trying to do, both in my research and in my communication about the deacon, is that there is an avenue here. There is an opportunity here for people to explore that maybe God's calling them into something. And maybe when they look at a manual like I did, they read the description and think, oh, I could never be that. And we miss an opportunity.
Yeah.
So that's kind of been the passion behind
that's good. That's good.
My research.
Yeah.
To share this more widely.
Yeah. Well, I as you were talking, I wanted to, I was going to say something incorrect, so I looked it up. But in the Presbyterian model, so PCUSA, Presbyterian America, Evangelical Presbyterian, you have teaching elders and ruling elders. But how I understood it is the ruling elders, in my interactions with Presbyterian friends, shout out to friends in Kansas City, Presbyterians, the ruling elders were in a lot of ways like how you just described deacon. So the ruling elders of the people that I knew, they were teachers, public school teachers, accountants, but they were a part of the ruling body within the local presbytery and within the church. But the teaching elders were the ones that went off to seminary, learned theology. They were the preachers. Those were the preachers. Those would be what. So that's interesting. If and I kind of wondered about that. So I'm excited to get more into your research. But that seems like that's kind of our distinguisher on those two. Maybe I'm overplaying that, but a little bit in there.
Well, what you've just illustrated here is why there's confusion. Every denomination that has a deacon defines it differently. And so my eyes were open to this back in 2011 when I was invited to join a conference on the diaconate in the Methodist Church in Britain. And they asked me to come and share what a Nazarene perspective was. And that actually became my first published article because I didn't have enough of an answer. But when I joined that, it was very clear in the room that there's no consensus amongst denominations of what a deacon is.
What a deacon is, yeah.
So, for example, you said Presbyterian. I could say Baptist. And in the Baptist tradition, a deacon is a local church board member.
Yeah. Yeah,
right?
yeah.
They're not an ordained thing. It doesn't go beyond the borders of a local church. And that's how they understand deacon. If you go back to the early church, which is, of course, a great place to start, one thing that convinced me this is worthy of investigation further was the word diakonos, which has been translated often as serve or service. The classic line is in Mark's gospel. Jesus says, I came not to be served, but to serve. The word is diakonos. But actually that word diakonos, diakonia, and its different forms could also be translated minister or ministry. And if you explore some extra biblical material, so if you look in the Roman society, you find that the word diakonos is used. And when it's used, it is used or translated into English word, emissary. So you might have a governor, you might have a centurion, you might have some kind of a person in authority who has a diakonos, who has an emissary. And that emissary, that diakonos, is one who has the authority of the person who sent them for a specific task or a specific role. And so when I read things like that, I'm like, oh, okay, I get it. And I see why different churches will have different definitions.
Well, not to go Tom Holland on us, but you kind of get that in the notion of prime minister, public servant. That's kind of built into our language. That's good. Yep. I like that. Yeah. And I just double checked to double fact check myself. I don't have a producer, so I have to do it to myself. But
that's okay.
So the Presbyterians, they have ruling elders, teaching elders, and deacons. So it'd be interesting to see how they distinguish all that. So that's fascinating.
Yep.
Because we have elder, deacon, and then we actually do have like a lay minister route through discipleship too. So it's
just
interesting
to confuse you a bit more.
Yeah, exactly. And then you have NMI and NYI and NDI, all the fun stuff.
But and you know what? I do this research. I'm a a critical thinker, and I think we should do our best to get it as right as we can for
Yes,
ourselves.
yes, of course.
But all of these avenues are avenues for ministry, right? They're all callings of God. They're all people who just want to serve Jesus, and to be able to open someone's eyes to a window of opportunity that they didn't know existed. And how that's called prevenient grace, right? We're being a means of grace to that person if we say, actually, have you considered this? And so instead of saying, oh man, that's really confusing, I don't know how to work that out. I was thankful that my board of ministry in the UK said, okay, well, let's explore that together. We're not 100% sure what this is. You're working it out yourself.
Yeah, no,
Let's
that's
do
cool.
this.
That's neat.
Let's do this together, you know?
Yeah, yeah, that's great. And a help to the church. What a help to the church to process through that. So
Yeah.
you've helped me out
absolutely.
processing through it. I'm going to go back and read. I don't know if I've actually ever read it, so I'm going to call myself out there, but I'm going to read it and process through the deacon route. So that's pretty cool. Well, I'm going to steal a Stan Reederism from Stan Reeder. I don't know if he came up with this, but what question did I not ask you? You're like, man, I was hoping Nate was going to ask me about this. So what am I missing?
Yeah. So you didn't ask me about my different roles that I've done in the last few years,
Yeah,
or
tell me about him.
how I ended up in Australia.
That's true. We
Um,
didn't get to Australia. We got stuck in Manchester. So how did you get it to
yeah,
Australia? And I noticed you had a wedding ring. So did you meet your wife in England? Where'd you meet her? Where's your
absolutely.
wife
So
from?
if you had a different podcast, um, I would tell you my story about how I met Kat, my wife. She's British, and she started studying for her undergraduate at NTC in Manchester the same day that I started studying for my master's degree. Um, her mother is a pastor in the Nazarene church in the UK. So she grew up, in a pastor's home as well. We met at NTC Manchester. We got married in 2009, and again, that's why the UK kind of became a home for
Yeah,
about
yeah,
15 years, give or take. Um, so I finished the PhD that same year that I finished the PhD. I applied and was accepted for the registrar role at NTC Manchester. So that was my first kind of job in the academic world. Then I moved into a teaching role, church history with some Wesley studies focus. Did that full time for 2 years. For the next 3 years, I shifted from that just teaching role to a more broad teaching, research, and teaching and something we called church resource and innovation and study abroad. Um, so some of your listeners may have met me through our study abroad program in NTC in Manchester. I was so happy that by the end of that period of several years where we kind of got that thing going, we ended up having like 9 partnerships with institutions. We welcomed 24 students, and I'm happy to say it's still ongoing. I think there's still some study abroad students going to Manchester, and I highly recommend it. I think every minister or someone thinking about ministry should do a study abroad experience. And you got to get yourself out your comfort zone. You got to know what it's like to be in a country where you're not the majority. Because even if you never find yourself living somewhere else, you're going to have people like that in your congregations. You need to be able to empathize, with them. You need to know what culture shock is, right? So I did that. Then in 2020, I was asked by the principal here in Brisbane if I would be interested in moving to Australia. At the time, we hadn't considered moving. I wasn't looking for a different job. My wife was settled. We had been at our local church there. She was pastoring, and we were happy there. But it was this door of opportunity that opened up. Maybe it was a COVID fog. That was 2020 when we got the request. So we took about 6 weeks of discernment and ended up saying yes. So we moved here in 21. So we've been here for just about 5 years. A couple of years into that, the principal left and moved to a different college, Salvation Army College, in a different country. And several people said I should put my hand up for this job. And so I did. And so now I've been principal here for 2 years. Principal is the Commonwealth system word for president. And yeah, so I've been principal here for 2 years. I still teach. My area is theology and church history. I supervise PhDs. I get to every once in a while, I get to present papers. I'm a teacher at heart. That's where I love. But being principal is great. I do the networking thing. I hopefully create some new partnerships. A lot to manage. We're a small team, much smaller here than I was used to. But yeah, I enjoy it. So that's why we're here. I've got 2 daughters. One's 10 and one is 13. They love it here. Australia is a very outdoorsy kind of a place, so lots to do. We live in Queensland.
Have you taken up
so
surfing?
I haven't, but I have taken up backpacking, hiking.
Yeah.
So I go out into the bush, as we say here, and up into the mountains and go hiking, camping with a buddy of mine.
I had the pleasure of meeting Richard Giskin. Am I saying his name right? Richard Giskin, and he was showing me. Or is it Geiskin? See, now I'm gonna be mad at myself. Is it
Geeskin?
Got it wrong twice. Anyways,
that's okay.
Yeah, he was just showing me how beautiful Gold Coast is, Queensland.
It is
just amazing, mind blowing. I mean, you look at pictures of it; it's just crazy how beautiful it is. So,
being in Brisbane, you're about an hour's drive from anything natural that you want. White sandy beaches down on the Gold Coast, rocky beaches up towards the Sunshine Coast, desert. If you want to go west, mountains, rainforests, just the sea, the islands. We've got a ferry. I could drive right now 15 minutes down the road, get on a ferry, 45 minutes. I'm in this island that feels like you're in a tropical country, like out in the Pacific. It's a wonderful place to live.
Yeah, that's awesome. So the question I like to ask, I don't ask all my guests, but my question is, what do you do when you rest? You said hiking, but what's your rest look like?
I enjoy hanging out with my family. One thing that I will say, moving to a different country with the family has, in my experience, it's drawn us much closer. We're pretty close knit, group of 4. But so we like to go to theme parks. Down on the Gold Coast, about 45 minutes to an hour's drive. There's SeaWorld and Warner Brothers Movie World, Paradise Country, which is like a animal park and a
cool.
water park. So we do like to do that. I like to read. I know that's kind of my job, but I enjoy reading as well.
Do you read fiction to kind of rest your mind? Do you do that?
No.
Disciplined yourself that way? Okay, no. History? What do you like to read?
I like history and theology, man. It's just my world. And especially being principal now, I don't have as much time, so that relaxes me. I love to rest. I love exploring new places. And like I said, we're within reach of all kinds of different, I love nature. I love being outdoors. And anytime I get a chance to do that, that kind of fills my heart with joy. I preached recently on transfiguration, and I talked about hilltop moments. And I began the sermon by an illustration of how I love going up into the mountains. And that's a place where I meet with God. And then that's a nice little transition to mountaintop experiences in the Bible.
Yeah, now have you run in your hiking? Have you run into not that I only watch Australia for the snakes, but I've watched plenty of the snake videos in Australia, the poisonous snakes in the world. You run into anything dangerous in the outback, in the wild, anything like that?
Yes, both here on campus and on my hiking trips. There is a snake called a red-bellied black snake, and it's one of the most poisonous in the country. Within a few months of being here, I was moving like a stack of wood that was on the back of our house. I was moving it to the front of the house, and I carried it through our house and set it down outside. And when I set it down, here comes this red belly. And I didn't know at the time. But yeah, that's one of the most poisonous snakes. So I was, thankful that it sat in the wood until I set the wood down. When I've gone out camping, let's see. Yeah, the last time we went camping, we saw a brown snake, which I don't think it's ridiculously poisonous. but yeah, I could send you a video after the podcast.
Yeah,
I'll show
please.
you. I'll show you some
Please.
of my adventures on campus here. We've got a 28-acre campus, and it's got about half of it is kind of woodland. We have a goanna, which think like a really large lizard. I mean, I'm talking like 2 meters, kind of a long lizard that wanders around campus every once in a while. On occasion, we will see a koala. But every day we have wallabies, which are like small kangaroos.
Ah, that's awesome.
Every
You
day
got
they
any,
come
you got any
around.
pictures or videos of wallabies? I'd love to see those.
I'll send you something
Oh yeah,
afterwards.
I'd love to see that.
Yeah, wallabies are great. They're really
Yeah.
cute, and
Yeah.
at the moment it's birthing season. So this morning actually I saw a wallaby that's just about that big. In the
that's
mother's
great.
pouch. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
great. Yeah,
Yeah.
there's so many things you can see. I will say one thing that I really didn't like was up in Leamington National Park. You have leeches, and
Yeah.
I grew up with leeches. Thinking, do you remember the movie Stand By Me in the 90s?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Do you remember they go swimming and then they get out
Yep.
and they've got all these
Yep.
big? That's what I thought leeches were. That you would only get them if you go swimming in like the wilderness,
Right.
and these
Yeah.
big things like that are
Yeah.
stuck on your skin. But no, up in Leamington National Park, you have these. They're almost like little inchworm. These tiny little things that just walking through the
Just
trail,
woodland or whatever trail. Yeah.
everywhere,
Oh, no.
all over your feet,
Oh no.
and you're constantly trying to like flick them off.
Yeah.
So a buddy of mine, we got to our campsite and we're just kind of undoing our backpacks and things. And I look at him and he's got like this big blood spot on his shirt. I'm like, what is that?
Oh,
Takes off his shirt. There you go. This leech going to town, getting some blood.
no.
So that's probably the worst thing I've experienced in terms of wildlife.
Yeah.
So gross. The
The
leeches.
leeches. Oh my goodness. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Warner Brothers World, they got Harry Potter stuff down there at all, or are they into the?
No, let's see. What are the themes? The most recent one that they've put together is Wizard of Oz. So there's a
cool.
Wizard of Oz world.
Yeah.
There's the DC comics, like superheroes. So it's like Superman.
Yeah.
Ride. There's a
That's cool.
what's it called? The Joker. Has like a big roller coaster.
Yeah.
And then the kind of kids area is Looney Tunes.
Yeah. Oh, that's fun.
It is.
You get
fun.
to you get to see your parents frequently? Do they visit or?
That's one of the downsides of being living in different places. So we were already a 2-country family. My wife's from England.
Now you're
that's
3.
Her parents live in Wales. And then my parents are still in Tennessee. So that's a tough one. We do what we can when we can. My wife's parents were able to come here last year. So her mom actually got a sabbatical, and she spent her sabbatical here for a couple of months, which is wonderful.
That's great. Yeah, that's
and
great.
Her dad came for the last 2-3 weeks as a holiday.
Yeah.
My folks, we need to go visit them. They're not too keen on traveling. And last Christmas, we were not 25 but 24. We were over in Tennessee, which is great. Yeah, it's hard when you follow God. Sometimes there are sacrifices that are made, and that's one of them. But thankfully,
that's tough.
We have technology like this. At any point, I can pick up my phone and call mom and dad, and it's hard, but it's okay.
Where are they at in Tennessee?
They're in East Tennessee in a small town called Jamestown. It is well known for Sergeant Alvin C. York, who was a World War I hero. Yeah. And you may have seen the black and white movie. The high school I went to was called York Institute. And he founded that institute from the $25,000 he made from that movie back in the 1930s. Yeah. Isn't that cool?
Yeah.
And it's a unique institution because he managed to get the state of Tennessee to agree to continue funding, at least in part, that institution in perpetuity. So it's one of 2 schools in the state of Tennessee that is designated as a state special school. And it's just remarkable. It's got a big farm, like a 400-acre farm. And at the time, the reason he did this, the only opportunities for education for people up in because the countryside, right? This is wilderness, podunk from my Georgia friends. The only education you could get, if you could get an education, was up to like grade 6. And so when he got high school established in that small little town, that for them was like university. That for them, this is like, wow, we are able to provide our children with something that they would never experience if it weren't for Alvin York. So yeah, it's a great little town.
When did Alvin
going
York
back.
pass away? Do you know?
It would have been in the, I want to say 60s.
Okay.
Because he was World War I.
Yeah, he was. Yeah. This is a weird Holiness Today trivia for you. You're the second person to bring up Sergeant York on the podcast.
Ooh, who brought it up first?
Wendell Brown did. I believe it was Wendell. I'm gonna have to go back and listen to it, and it was maybe someone that was mentored by Sergeant York. There's some sort of other Sergeant York connection, and I got to go back and look at it.
Well, I'll give you one more layer. His son, one of his children, was both a Nazarene pastor in Nashville, Tennessee.
Yeah.
In Fatherland
There's got to
Church.
be a connection there.
And he also was a member in my local church in Tennessee for the rest of his life. For the end of his life, like 20 years. Ed York was his name.
Yeah.
So.
I think it was Wendell. I'm going to go back and listen to it. As you were talking,
I'll have to go listen to it too, man.
Yeah. The second time Sergeant York's been dropped. Yeah, that's so funny. Awesome. Well, I know you're busy, and this is a research day, and I've kept you for an hour and a half. But I would like to reconnect. I mean, you're talking about. I'll tell you what my heart is, and I'm doing it while we're recorded, so I'm on the spot. My heart is to get more connection points in Asia Pacific for the podcast, because it's hard, it's difficult. So, if that's something that you got a heart for, a desire for, people that would like to connect more with the podcast, maybe help me out. We'd love that. I mean, that's something we're praying over and thinking about. So,
I would be happy to. The people in my world down here are just absolutely wonderful. When I say my world, it's kind of the southern part of the Asia Pacific region. So Australia, New Zealand, Pacific Islands, right? Samoa, Fiji, Tonga, Solomon Islands, Vanuatu, PNG, Papua New Guinea, and some of the most hospitable, welcoming, happy people that you would ever meet. Servant-hearted. I've got several people in my mind right now that I can send a text message to.
Yeah, that'd be great. I interviewed
get you connected.
Ingrid Lustanya up in Taiwan.
Okay. Yep.
Yeah. She's working up there. Her and her husband Terrence are missionaries.
Excellent.
So I'm trying to make more connections. Michelle's such a good connector, though, and we've interviewed Kafoa. I didn't do the interview; Jim Ritchie did it, but we've interviewed Kafoa for the podcast, But it'd be nice to have more regular connections, So maybe some co-hosting kind of things would be kind of fun.
I'd be happy to.
Yeah, that'd be fun to do. I'd like to do that.
For the first 2 years I was here, I was dean of students, and which is kind of like chaplain. And one of the challenges that I tried to overcome was this. Online learning, right? So we had very few students on campus. And I'm like, how do we connect? And the thing that we were missing, or one of the things that you miss when you're studying online, is those kind of natural connections that are made, right? Let's coffee break, hallway conversation, see somebody in the library, let's go for lunch, those types of things. Let's kind of decompress after class, or let's have further conversation about what happened in class. That just doesn't happen. You don't get to know students naturally. And so the way that I thought maybe we can overcome this is if you create intentionally a form of connection that will make those things happen. And so I actually started a podcast
very
for
good.
our college. It's called We Are NTC. And we have about 20 episodes. I had to pause it because my role changed to principal. But I interviewed people similar to what you're doing. But with a focus on, tell me your story about how you were a student. So
we should do like a simulcast, whatever, how do they say that? But like a we not simulcast because we're not doing it live, but we both do it. You put it up on yours, I put it up on mine. That'd be kind of fun to do like a
That
little.
would be because the people I would connect you to would likely have some kind of a connection to college.
Yeah, it'd be fun.
I like that. That's a good idea.
Beneficial
We
too.
we can keep this
Hey,
going.
send me the name of your podcast too. I'll put it in our show description so people can connect to that as well. So that'd be great. Yeah.
I can do that, man.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, I apologize for not being as sharp as I usually am. It's the evening, and I'm going on a week and a half of sickness. So listeners, be praying for me. I don't get sick this often, so I think it was all saving up to be this sick this long, I think is what it was. So, but
Wow.
It was a pleasure to connect with you, and I look forward to more collaboration in the future. It'll be a lot of fun.
All right, buddy. Thanks so much. It's good to speak to you and good to speak to your listeners. And as a listener myself, thank you for what you've been doing. I've learned a lot about some people I knew and some people I didn't know.
Yes, that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to get us all connected. So it's fun.
Yeah. So keep it up, Nate. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to the Holiness Today podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to us and follow us on social media. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube Music, Amazon, Audible, and wherever else you may find your podcasts.